Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
They're talking about a truce, and this is a pretty big deal as we left off yesterday with the prospect of a meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. They said the next few days, remember, logistics, details were being finalized. We do not have news yet on a date or even venue for a meeting, but it does look like the gears are turning here with important news on the Bloomberg terminal. Washington and Moscow now aiming to reach a deal to halt the war in Ukraine. They're talking about a truce that would involve basically freezing the lines in place, which, by the way, seemed like a total deal breaker just weeks ago for Ukraine. Freezing the lines in place, the land that Russia has occupied, would basically be the new map. And there is no reason to bet right now that this is going to happen. But we want to wade into these waters with Courtney McBride, our national security reporter here in Washington, with a couple of stories to hit because we've got big news happening in the Middle East as well. Courtney, it's great to have you back in Washington here. The idea that we're talking a truce before these two even meet would suggest some real progress behind the scenes. What do we know?
Well, certainly, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff went to Russia, and the president has said that that was a productive meeting, and that he is eager to move things forward. So, it's unclear as of yet exactly what kind of lines we're talking about, but it does seem from our reporting that it could be particularly disadvantageous to Ukraine.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. And if it sounded like a deal breaker a couple of weeks ago, could it still be when Volodymyr Zelenskiy is presented with freezing lines in place? All the land that was lost is officially gone. What will be his response?
It's unclear. Zelensky has proven willing to make some concessions in an effort to get this moving and to halt the killing, as President Trump has said. But it's unclear that a trilateral meeting would even happen among the three leaders. President Trump has said he's willing to meet with President Putin, even if Putin doesn't agree to meet with Zelensky. But everyone has to agree to move forward, and as of right now, it's unclear.
So it becomes a question of how bad do you want to end this war? You would hand over the entire Donbas to Russia under this construct. What do we know about a meeting? It seemed like we were on the verge of something yesterday, but it was largely the Kremlin filling in the blanks. What are we hearing from the administration? Certainly,
the administration has said that that something could happen in short order, but as you said, we don't know dates, we don't know venues. The Kremlin has said that a venue has been selected, but we're all waiting with bated breath to see what happens.
The president seemed to oscillate between this idea of forcing a meeting between Putin and Zelensky first, or having them all three at the same table, trilateral talks, or maybe not at all until there's a deal. The president at first said that would be required. Now he says, I'll do anything to stop the war. It sounds to me like Volodymyr Zelenskiy may not be invited to that first session.
Well, that is certainly a concern. And, he obviously wants to have a seat at the table. It's unclear that Ukraine will be able to make its voice heard if it's not even in the room.
Well, keep this in mind because this is developing. It could develop before our eyes today. With our eyes on the headlines here, we have to cover what's happening in the Middle East as Israel approves a proposal to occupy Gaza City. This is a very important development. Here's Benjamin Netanyahu on Fox News expressing his intentions to occupy the full Gaza Strip.
We intend to, in order to assure our security, remove Hamas there, enable the population to be free of Gaza, and to pass it to civilian governance. That is not Hamas and not anyone advocating the destruction of Israel. That's what we want to do.
Important distinction here. He wanted to initially have a military occupation of the entire Gaza Strip. It's now Gaza City. But even this sort of smaller footprint is getting some opposition inside Netanyahu's government. Remarkable to see the chief of staff from the IDF tell that Benjamin Netanyahu he was walking into a trap in a recent meeting. How is this going to unfold?
Well, I mean, it's unclear. There's certainly a lot of pressure and criticism on Prime Minister Netanyahu, both from inside Israel and from the international community, that this is escalatory and that it will only lead to more destruction. Families of the hostages still held by Hamas are also concerned that this is, incredibly dangerous for their loved ones.
Yeah, that's something. The goal, they say, is to evacuate all Palestinian civilians from Gaza City by October 7th. Do we know where they would go?
That is unclear at this stage.
Yeah.
Netanyahu has said that he has no interest in occupying Gaza or ruling Gaza over the long term, and that the eventual plan is to turn it over to an Arab force. But, that is down the line.
Sounds like we've got a lot to learn still. Courtney, thank you.
Indeed.
As always, Courtney McBride covering national security here in Washington. We do have opportunities, by the way, to hear from the president today. He's got the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan arriving at the White House a couple of hours from now. And there will be stages of public events through the day, according to the president's schedule here, giving him some opportunities to maybe make some news on this front. Never mind finding peace between those two nations, which is the point of their visit today, following a years-long, decades-long cross-border skirmish.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Thanks for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Always a pleasure to meet you at the threshold of the weekend. It does feel like it a bit in Washington where things are kind of quiet, but soon we'll have some activity at the White House as the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan join President Trump today for a series of events that'll walk us through the afternoon, culminating with a trilateral signing of a peace agreement. That is the way the president will be wrapping his week, with big news on Russia and Ukraine. This will likely dominate our conversations next week, and it's already played a pretty big role in this one, even as reciprocal tariffs took effect, along with so many other things. This is the day, by the way, that secondary tariffs were intended to take effect, according to the president of the United States. Secondary tariffs against nations buying oil from Russia. But Bloomberg has been doing some remarkable reporting here. According to people familiar with the matter, Washington and Moscow are now aiming to reach a deal to halt the war, and they're even using the word truce here toward an agreement on territories for the planned summit that we expect in the days ahead between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. They say this could happen as early as next week. This is very unclear right now in terms of timing and venue, but the spirit of this deal might be a non-starter for Volodymyr Zelenskiy, as it would demand Ukraine cede its entire eastern Donbas region, as well as Crimea, and essentially freeze in place the lines that have been the subject of this war of attrition for so long. It's where we start our conversation with Wendy Sherman. Always a delight to have the former Deputy Secretary of State in the Biden administration, now Joint Senior Fellow with the Belfer Center for Public Leadership at Harvard University. Wendy, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. When you consider this potential deal as the way I just described it, freezing the lines in place, is that something that Ukraine will accept?
Well, I think, first of all, congratulations to Bloomberg on gathering such important information, if indeed these are the outlines of a possible, at least, stopping the tremendous bombardment of Ukraine with so many lives lost. I think we all would welcome a ceasefire. But it's not only about territory, which will be suspect. It's how do you guarantee enforcement of those lines? How do you make sure that Russia doesn't go further? Does Russia also require that the Ukraine not join the European Union, not join NATO, that in the past Putin has said that Ukraine must demilitarize? I can't imagine Zelensky doing that. And although the Ukrainian people are war weary for a very good reason and really wish this horrible war would be over, this horrific illegal invasion, it does remain to be seen not only whether Zelensky will accept this and Ukraine as a whole, but whether Europe, which will have to enforce this future, and NATO will accept it.
You wonder what kind of message we're sending here, realizing that parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk have been under Russian occupation since 2014 illegally. Putin declared the 4 Ukrainian regions to be forever part of Russia when he announced the annexation back in 2022, even though he's never actually controlled these territories. So this deal would codify this arrangement, and you tell me, would not tell other nations to try to do the same?
Yes, I think this would be a terrible outcome, as you say, not only for Ukraine, but it would also say that other leaders can take territory, perhaps Xi Jinping take Taiwan with impunity, that others around the world could take territory with impunity, that sovereignty, territorial integrity, the right of countries to make their own choices would go by the wayside. So I think there's a lot of detail here. It's one thing to say to get a ceasefire, to stop the bombardment, things freeze in place, but then to get a final peace agreement, I cannot imagine Ukraine deciding that it's going to forever give up this territory and say that it belongs to Russia. We have never said that Crimea belongs to Russia, that they, in fact, legally own Crimea. I can't imagine we will do this for the Donbas either. I think it's important too, Joe, for your listeners to understand that all of this, of course, we want peace to break out around the world, but President Trump has said he could deal with this on day one. He said he could solve the Middle East on day one, and we have a real crisis of starvation in Gaza and a prime minister who now wants to go all in taking Gaza City, putting the hostages at risk. We have, yes, this meeting at the White House today between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I understand that it may mean that a transit route will get named after President Trump. Everybody knows how to flatter him to try to get what they want, but it won't, in essence, really resolve Nagorno-Karabakh, which is at the heart of the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It also will not be something that Russia much likes. And then, of course, we've got these tariffs that are supposed to come in, secondary tariffs on India at the end of this month. That's all leverage in getting to an agreement on Ukraine. So the president has thrown a lot at all of us. And I think some of this is to make sure that we don't keep talking about that really nasty problem he's got in front of him called the release of the Epstein files.
Wow, you just married a whole bunch of stories there, Wendy. I hadn't heard about this trade route named for Trump. This is fascinating. As I read here, the agreement between the two nations would create the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. So that's how it's done. I'm going to ask you about what's happening in the Middle East in just a moment, but I want to just get your take as a professional diplomat on this back and forth over who should be in the meeting. At one point, President Trump said that Zelensky and Putin must first meet. Then he said maybe the three of them would meet together. And now he has walked that back to suggest that he's willing to meet with Putin alone, having said that, quote, "I don't like long waits. They would like to meet with me, and I will do whatever I can to stop the killing," unquote. If Zelensky's not in the room, what good is this?
Well, it certainly won't get us to a peace agreement, that's for sure. And, you know, the president is a very transactional negotiator. But what I find very interesting is he often gives up leverage in advance, trying to incentivize people to come to the table. He's doing that with Putin. Putin very much wants this meeting so he can look like he's in charge. He's defining what will happen here. I think Zelensky felt he'd gotten further with the president when they met on the margins of the Pope's funeral. But my guess is right now he's in a pretty nervous place. And the president spoke to the leaders of Europe with Zelensky on the phone to talk about what might be happening here. But details are never Trump's strong suit. Most of these tariff deals, as you all know better than I do, are really quite broad decisions without all of the details really being inked. without any of us really knowing what's going to happen over the long term. We've seen that in the dust-up with Japan. I'm sure we will see that with others as well.
I'll be deeply curious to hear if President Trump weighs in on Israel's decision to occupy Gaza City. He does have, as I mentioned, some public opportunities here to speak today, but it's important. Israel's Security Council approving a plan to militarily occupy Gaza City as opposed to all of the Gaza Strip. Is it possible to defeat Hamas, as Israel is suggesting, without endangering the hostages that are the whole point of this conflict?
Sadly, Joe, I don't think so. The IDF, in fact, said during this 10-hour overnight discussion in the Israeli Security Cabinet that they could not say that the hostages would remain alive. They also said there would be many more deaths of IDF as well as civilians. Nonetheless, the Security Cabinet decided to go ahead. This has been roundly condemned all over the world, and quite extraordinarily, the Chancellor of Germany has said that no military weapons will go to Israel that might be used in Gaza as a result of this decision. I haven't found anyone yet who supports what the Prime Minister is doing, except for his very, very right-wing coalition partners who want to see Israel take over pretty much everything, including the West Bank.
We're showing some pretty horrifying images of Palestinians who are starving, trying to access food. And part of this plan would include the IDF providing humanitarian aid to civilians outside of combat zones as they enter Gaza City. It is unclear what these combat zones will be, though, and the camps that will be created in other areas to house refugees. Wendy, you know how complicated this type of planning can be. I'm just curious, drawing on your experience in the Biden administration, did President Biden, did Secretary of State Antony Blinken ever envision this going on for so long?
This has just been horrifying. As I believe even President Trump has reportedly said to Prime Minister Netanyahu in a phone conversation, don't tell me it's fake. This is Donald Trump saying, this is not fake news. You can just look at the pictures and see that they're starving people. 4 more people died of starvation today, including 2 children. The IDF has said it will take until, I think, at least October to get everybody out of Gaza City and find places for them to go. There's no housing in any of Gaza, except some remaining in Gaza City. So where people will live is not known. You cannot feed this many people with one aid station. You have to have many aid stations so that you don't have people dying as they get stampeded trying to find food. It is a tragedy that USAID is gone. USAID knew how to do this. We had the expertise. We've done it all over the world. We know how to set up these humanitarian corridors and aid stations. The current foundation that's doing this really doesn't know how to do this. And there were months when Israel would not allow in any food. So we are in a very terrible place. And with this new effort to take over Gaza City, things are even worse.
Well, I was just going to say that the World Food Program knows how to do this too. Cindy McCain knows how to do this, but they've told us that they won't be allowed in. So will this occupation change that?
I don't see how. And the Prime Minister has sort of pulled back a little bit today, not saying they're going to occupy Gaza, because if they occupy Gaza legally, then they are responsible to making sure that everybody's fed and housed. So they are saying that they are going to really just get rid of Hamas, demilitarize Gaza, get Arab states to come in and take care of Gaza. But as others have said, I cannot imagine Arab states coming in behind the guns of Israel to take care of Palestinians. And Saudi Arabia, among other countries, has denounced this plan today.
Wendy, I'm really glad you could join us in bringing your experience to our conversation here on Balance of Power. Wendy Sherman is former Deputy Secretary of State in the Biden administration, now Joint Senior Fellow, the Belfer Center and Center for Public Leadership at Harvard University.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Here in the capital city, which is in itself in the news. Maybe you're coming down for a little vacation, visit the Smithsonian, tour the monuments this summer. If you do, you will likely see a lot more police than you may have otherwise. And when I say that, I mean federal police. Alongside D.C. Metro cops, the President of the United States is making this request, and it's already happening. This deployment was ordered today at 12:01 a.m., including law enforcement officers from a wide swath of agencies across the federal government, immigration police, tasked with deportations. We've got the FBI here, U.S. Marshals, DEA, and as the Washington Post reports, 12 other federal agencies. That's a lot of police cruisers. And they say that this will be very noticeable in the high traffic tourist areas. So as I say, if you're coming to the Smithsonian, if you're crossing the mall, if you're anywhere around us here at Bloomberg, you're probably going to notice the difference. And this is something the president has talked about before. He has described our capital city as being filthy and dirty and violent and crime-ridden. And he has threatened to federalize the city as a result, most recently prompted by the assault of a Doge worker that led to the arrests of a couple of teenagers here. This individual, Edward Korestein, who was one of Elon Musk's top lieutenants at the Doge, known affectionately online as Big Balls, was beaten badly after he tried to help a woman who was being carjacked, according to what the president said. Here's Donald Trump from earlier this week.
By the way, I have to say that somebody from Doge was very badly hurt last night. You saw that. A young man who was beat up by a bunch of thugs in D.C. And either they're going to straighten their act out in the terms of government and in terms of protection, or we're going to have to federalize and run it the way it's supposed to be run.
Let's assemble our political panel. They both know a lot about Washington, D.C. And I'll preface this by telling you that it is actually a city that we don't only live and work in, but a place that we love. Rick Davis, Bloomberg politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg politics contributor, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, there's always something wrong with a city, and you can always, I guess, clean a city more and make it safer. But the fact is, when we look at D.C. crime statistics for this year, 2025, we find that all crime is actually down. The president said it was way up. It's down 7% from the year earlier. Violent crime is down 26%, and assault with a weapon is down 20%. Do we need to federalize Washington, D.C.?
Well, the city can always be safer, and the one I live in should be the safest. So I'm for safety, and we've lived here a long time, and the city's gone through various levels of crime, sometimes being the nation's murder capital, and sometimes not. And I think it's great that we're experiencing a downturn in crime, but you can never be diligent enough. And I don't begrudge the president for a show of force. There have been some very high-profile murders and robberies and assaults recently that have made front-page news in most newspapers around the country, and that's no way for our nation's capital to look to the rest of the world and to the rest of our country. So it'll be interesting to see how long this lasts or where it ultimately goes. I can't imagine a scenario where the federal government wants to run a city. They're good at a lot of things, but city management may or may not be a skill set. And so if this is a show of force to reduce crime, I'm for it. If it's something beyond that, you really want to think about it.
Well, we have come a long way, obviously, since the 1980s, when a lot of people did refer to this city as the murder capital of the world. To your point, Rick, back in the days of Mayor Marion Barry, going all the way up through COVID and some of the problems that Washington had keeping things safe and keeping things clean. At this point, though, we've had a massive amount of money invested in this town. We've seen people come from all over the world to create a very diverse community who lives here, side by side with people who grew up in Washington, D.C. All of that said, Jeannie, we should separate these two concepts. Okay, make the city safer with the help of federal law enforcement as opposed to federalizing the city and having the federal government run Washington, D.C. Which do you want to see?
I want to thank the president for not using that young man's nickname when he spoke about him. I was very grateful for that. And it was horrific what happened to that young man, just 19 years old. That said, the commitment to federalizing DC is a long-standing commitment by Donald Trump and the GOP overall. The Republican Party's platform in 2024 had this in it. It has long been discussed by Donald Trump. And so what we seem to be seeing, given the crime numbers that you talked about, rightly so, is that he is using this in order to pursue an agenda that he has long been pursuing, which is to criticize cities run by Democrats, to say they are violent, and to threaten to take them over. And so, yes, I agree with Rick. I think every thinking person does. Everyone wants any community to be safer. But since when does the Republican Party believe that they are better off putting the federal government in to do something at the ground rather than leaving it to the state and in this case, the local community? And so I think there is a bit of hypocrisy there. We've also seen, by the way, just this session in Congress, we saw a senator and a representative introduce legislation to repeal the home rule, which is another thing Donald Trump wants to do. So it's a longstanding commitment of Donald Trump's, and it seemed to be triggered by this horrific violence we saw the other day, but the numbers don't support it.
A lot of people who don't live here may not realize this whole idea of home rule is actually a relatively recent one for the people of Washington, D.C., and remains a controversial one. You see people driving around with a license plate. It says taxation without representation. I remember when Tony Williams put that into effect. Home rule was passed in 1973, Rick. If the president really wanted to federalize the city, it would take an act of Congress to overturn the Home Rule Act. And we can't even write a budget around here. Could that happen?
Well, on a straight line party vote, yeah, you probably could. Although I think you'd find a lot of Republicans echoing what Jeannie just said, which is, what in the world are we going to do running a city? I thought we were for, the federal government getting out of the nitty gritty of our community. So I think there's an ideological issue there, but there is a political issue too. And I think this is one of the things that Donald Trump is sort of giving us a head fake on. We talked a lot in the height of the presidential campaign about what a poor job the Democrats have done in these cities to manage the rhetoric around crime and why it should be an issue that Democrats own, and yet they virtually abdicated it to the Republicans. And if there are issues that you want to go to try and get some of these suburban congressional districts to flip from Democrat to Republican, you're going to go to the crime playbook. Law and order is a tried and true political device that Donald Trump has used in the past, and I believe is starting to head fake toward his way to doing that again for the 2026 election.
There are some other changes coming to the city that don't involve law enforcement, Jeannie. A statue of the Confederate General Albert Pike is apparently making its return to a location near Judiciary Square, and that's right downtown. If you're a tourist, you walk right by it near Pennsylvania Avenue. The National Park Service announced that just this week, remembering it was torn down by protesters in 2020. Also, a large Confederate memorial is being put back in Arlington National Cemetery. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, made this announcement today, having been removed in 2023 as part of a congressional attempt to remove Confederate imagery from military sites. What will this mean for the culture in Washington? Anything?
I think what we're seeing is, quite frankly, Donald Trump focusing on law and order, as Rick just talked about, and revitalizing these cultural issues that have worked for the Republican Party, to get their base out. And I think he is doing that in the wake of some really troubling jobs numbers that he obviously was very concerned about, the tariff war and uncertain economic issues. He is trying to refocus attention as he thinks forward to the midterm on these law and order and culture issues. And so I think we're going to see more and more of this, not just in DC, and you gave so many good examples of that, Joe, but I think around the country, to remind people of an issue that worked well for the Republicans in 2020 and has for a long time, about the far left, which we're talking about the MAGA, but you look at the far left wing of the Democratic Party and some of the ways in which they've gone to extremes on culture issues. So I think that's what we're seeing here. And I think it's going to be important for people in DC for whom some of these issues remind them of the reality that they don't have the ability to have full autonomy in terms of their governance and representation in the federal government. And that's always been troubling for them.
The president had called for the return of federal monuments that had been, quote, inappropriately removed, unquote, from Washington, D.C. The city's congressional delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, Rick, is going to be reintroducing a bill to ensure that the Pike statue is permanently removed. We've only got about a minute left. Do we just see this kind of back and forth over these cultural symbols for the rest of this president's term?
Yeah, this is just another flare-up of the sort of woke attacks that have been going on for some time. First of all, you should never tear down statues. You should go through a process. This got out of control, and now the pendulum swings back the other way. Military bases are being renamed after being changed, and these statues are going up. So it's the breathing in and out of power, and in this case, out goes the woke, in comes, the Trump administration.
I guess that's it. Rick, thank you. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Always a fascinating conversation. They'll be back on the late edition of Balance of Power, which, of course, starts at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thank you both. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.